The king of the aesthetes, really, although he's largely forgotten today, was Desmond Parsons. And Desmond Parsons is largely forgotten today. He was Anglo-Irish aristocracy. He's largely forgotten today because, unfortunately, he died of Hodgkin's lymphoma in 1937. Didn't leave any memoirs. His great friend was Robert Byron. Robert Byron was on an expedition, the travel writer. He was on an expedition, and he ended up going to Peking. And he stayed with Desmond Parsons in his hutong home, and he wrote from there his travel memoir that became The Road to Oxiana. Most people don't really think of it that way. He stayed at Parsons' hutong, which was an extremely nice hutong, and not far away was Harold Acton, who really is the sort of best remembered, I think, of the English and American aesthetes that went to China. And here he is on his hutong. They actually lived just across on opposite sides of the Forbidden City. Parsons' hutong was at the sort of top of Wang Fujing. Parts of it are still there. You can visit it. Acton's hutong on Gongjian hutong, Mei Longfang, the opera singer, lived at the other end of it, is still very intact and strangely not visited that often. It has a slight kink in either end of it, which was a very clever design to stop the hutong from becoming a wind tunnel. And that, I think, distracts the eye and means that people don't wander down that hutong enough. But it's an absolutely lovely hutong. Acton had a beautiful house there. Byron wrote about it, and I'll read you what he said. Hopefully, even though you're the Shanghai RAS, you have a love of hutongs, you certainly should. He says, the street, like all hutongs, is about 12 or 15 feet wide, just grey walls of one story with trees perking over the top. The front door is scarlet, and there are large inscriptions over it. Number 8 inside is a little court for the rickshaw and the servant's bicycle. Turn left through a door into a little vestibule, which is the spirit gateway. Turn right again, then to the left once more, and you are in the main court. Behind is another whole row of rooms and 2 more courtyards, in one of which, in a main line with the first spirit gate and the axis of the big room, is a tall wooden screen covered with ducks and lotuses to impede the spirits from reaching the concubines' quarters. The back court has a big tree in it, and the small court beside it, where I first lived, a clump of bamboo. Round the walls are various beds which have tree peonies in them, now done up in straw. The great pot in the middle of the main court is filled with lotuses in summer. The whole is of grey brick, bright grey, but the fronts of every pavilion consist of wooden lattices covered with paper. The courts are brick paved. It all looks very pretty on my birthday, which was February the 26th, so not dissimilar weather to the picture we see of Acton there, with deep snow on the ground and the roofs. All the pavilions lighted up inside and lanterns in the trees. Also big round lanterns with red characters on them hanging in the tripods beside the front door. This was actually, he wrote that, Byron, towards the end of his stay in Beijing in 1935. He had been very upset with Beijing and didn't like it. And I think this is a very common thing with people when they approach Peking. Some people love Peking the moment they get there. They love the hutongs. And I'm talking about old Peking. I mean, I don't think you'd have to be fairly weird to be interested in Soviet-style architecture and shopping malls. But they the old Peking of the hutongs and so on was much loved by people, but others didn't like it. They found it frustrating. They found it too quiet. They found the idea of not being able to see over walls, to not know what's going on the other side of the wall, to be frustrating and annoying. They found it to be a grey environment. If you know northern China, obviously the skies as well and the weather can often be quite, not necessarily inclement, but it's either sort of, roiling hot or sort of sandstorms and dust storms and freezing cold. That doesn't appeal to everyone. Byron as well was not happy. He suffered from various colds, gum mal kept getting him. And he also realized that Parsons was dying, and that was his oldest friend. And so he took against Beijing, and many of his writings about it, and you can read it in Byron's extensive diaries that have been published, don't reflect well on Beijing. But eventually he comes to love the city, and largely with people like Acton showing him around the city and showing him other things, starting to learn the language, learning to appreciate opera, learning to appreciate Chinese objects, art. He ends up acquiring any number of scrolls and artworks that he brings back to England eventually. Acton, of course, left shortly before the Japanese invasion, although, of course, if you want to know about Acton's Beijing and you want to read one of the funniest comic novels about expat life you can ever read, Peonies and Ponies, which was published during the war but actually refers back to Acton's time in the 1930s, is one of the funniest novels written about that. I mean, it is as funny as An Evelyn War and as observant as An Evelyn War, and yet slightly forgotten nowadays and not often reprinted, but very easy to get hold of, very much worth reading. And I guarantee you, if you've lived in China, even in Shanghai, for any period of time, you'll appreciate the types that he talks about. One of the chapters in the book is actually about Parsons, Byron, and Acton, but another one of the chapters in the book is actually about Peonies and Ponies, and looking at all of the characters are based on people that were in Peking at the time. And I think it's possible through various letters and various other ways to track who all of these people were, which is quite interesting.